getting an awareness of mental health, I think across New Zealand, Australia, as we said, is something that we're leading an area we don't want to. And just, certainly for me, dude, the amount of times that we have guys come to us that are trying to improve their physical health, and then we uncover all of these layers of self-care, of just not putting themselves forward. And I think you see that in so many areas. People get busy, and busy becomes this kind of the lowest rung of significance, where we can just be more busy and just feel like we're moving forward while we're still not getting anything done, right? And in the process, we just throw ourselves off that list time and time again. And so there's so much I want to dive into today. I'm going to break it down and give you some more consolidated questions. But just for the listeners, dude, just a short version of who's Warren. What do we need to know about you?
Thanks, Ollie. Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to be talking to you. Who am I? That's a big question. For a while there, I lost who I was, but
Yeah.
I'm Warren Davies. I'm a husband and a dad, a son, a brother, a mate, all those things. Just a normal bloke. Found myself in this space of mental health as a result of my own journey as a dairy farmer for most of my life. So fairly, I always pinch myself when I'm doing stuff like this, talking to people that, I was good at talking to cows, but not good at talking to people. And so now as a professional speaker, it's just kind of an oxymoron that, it's, couldn't get further poles apart. But I suppose my story and what I share now is born out of my whole life journey. From a kid growing up, I grew up in Melbourne, so here in Victoria, in Australia. Grew up as a kid. Mum and dad were small business owners. A couple of things I've found out about myself in hindsight, doing a couple of exercises like unpacking my journey. When I did a speaker course, one of the exercises we had to do was unpack our life, I suppose, to find the value in it, what we were going to share with an audience. That exercise for me was a lot of light bulb moments, because there was things that I found out about myself that I probably knew, never really acknowledged or understood as a kid growing up. And a lot of that was based around a couple of things, and that was my mental health. Knew that probably things weren't quite right as a kid growing up, but just wrote that off as being the norm as a kid growing up. So anxiety, low self-esteem, not so much depression, but, subjected to bullying at school. And I suppose an underlying theme from my story, an underlying theme to my story then was not doing enough about it, not reaching out for help. And that continued on. And we moved to the country, become farmers. Dad always harbored this dream of being a farmer. And, life was pretty good when we moved to the country. I thought that, it was a fantastic way for me to re-identify myself and move to the country. And, I was failing at school, so that wasn't a good thing. and eventually left school at 16 and become a dairy farmer. And because I hadn't dealt with a lot of this stuff that had happened as a kid, when I faced a traumatic event like a flood, and then a family bust up on our farm, it was a family farm, and then we entered into a drought, these things started to reappear again in my life. So I felt a lot of, my self-esteem was really low. I was feeling a lot of anxiety, but that then evolved into depression, and eventually led to a really downward spiral that, once again, didn't understand or probably acknowledge, or didn't reach out for help, or didn't know how to reach out for help, or didn't know who to talk to. And I found myself, in a really dark place that, ultimately saw me with feelings of, oh, I may as well not be here. And, that was a really low and dark space. And that's basically was the seed of why I do what I do today, is, being in that space, in that spot in my life, not knowing where or what to do, where to turn to, kind of planted the seed to what I do today. And I'm known as the unbreakable farmer, but I always feel like a bit of a tosser when I'm talking particularly to farmers about that, or rural communities, because, calling yourself unbreakable, well, I wasn't. I was totally broken. But that was something that was born again out of that speaker course. And now, I share my story and, around Australia and tools and strategies that I used in my life and some of the stuff that I've learned from people that, in the audiences that I speak in that help me, fill my mental health toolbox up with some tools that I can utilize when, things aren't going the way they're meant to be. And that's probably a really clear distinction I have to make from the start. Just because I'm a mental health speaker doesn't mean that that I'm immune to this. I still have my bad days. I still deal with anxiety and depression on a daily basis. And, that's, but I've got those tools that help me navigate that a little bit better these days.
Yeah, man. At the end of the day, it's part of the human experience. And I think one of the things I've heard on one of your podcasts before is understanding that just removing that label that feeling some sort of emotion is bad, right? Trying to get an awareness of adding these tools and tactics to be able to navigate life when you have the shitty days just allows you to give yourself permission to feel that and move through it rather than give yourself a reason to quickly get out of it, right? And I think it's really just that judgment of the two can be an issue. Look, where I want to start, dude, is we work with a ton of farmers, and we primarily work across New Zealand, Australia, and I think we've very much got the same attitudes to stress, to mental health, and to a lot of these areas that we need to improve. And I think we can really unpack that today. But the first one I think I want to look at is, I asked some members on our team the other day, just a very frank discussion around the females we work with versus the males we work with, right? And essentially, females, for the most part, right, this is overgeneralization, people that see things not working and they're like, oh, things are not feeling good. I'm going to make a change, right? So it's at the tickle. Things have just started to make a shift. But then men, they have the tickle, they have the whack, and then they wait for the full blown truck. And then like, maybe I should do something about it, right? Because
Yep.
there's the she'll be right culture. And whether that's with physical health or mental health, there's just so many years of extra burden that's added on there. And you've added this in a couple of your podcasts before, which is we don't want to be a burden on others, right? And there's that component where we just hold back and hold back and hold back until we finally talk about it. And we're so far down that hole. Usually, a lot of the people aren't equipped around us to actually help. Like, where the hell do we start? How long has this been here? Because we've kept that all bottled up.
Yeah.
So I think part of that is we can talk about that from both sides. How do we handle that being the person that wants to help and help that be the person? But I think really speaking to the I don't want to be a burden to others and getting past that to be able to have a chat, to be able to know what's going on so we can talk at the tickle or the whack, not waiting to the full blown truck. What does that look like for you?
Yeah. And I think, like, as I said, just, in that introduction to who I am, is that one of the underlying themes to my story just speaks to that perfectly is that, you know, my underlying theme to my story is not doing enough about stuff when I should have. And when I said, I went through those three really major upheavals in my life, which was the flood, the family bust up, and the drought. None of my plan and the eventual loss of a business, walking away from our farm, none of those plans ever involved anything about my well-being. It was always about, well, how do we recover from the flood, or how do we navigate the family bust up? Where do I get the money to buy mum and dad out of the farm? The drought, how do we deal with that? How do I keep my animals fed? It was nothing about me, and I think that's talks to what you're saying, is that when I look back, there were so many things that I needed to reach out and talk about, but I didn't. And whether it's a bloke thing, I always say I was tarred with the brush twice. I was a bloke and a farmer, so I had no hope because reaching out is definitely not something. And I don't know if it's to do with that stoic nature. But look, I find speaking in rural communities, not just a men thing either. It's, just that stoic, rural community kind of attitude that, as you said, she'll be right, or we can deal with this ourselves because we're used to that isolation. So for me, we need to, well, that's one of the main drivers. One of my parts of my mission is inspiring conversations. And I think that tries to get people back to that, let's deal with this now while it's just starting to happen, instead of letting that just compound over, whether it's months or whether it's weeks, months, years, or decades. Because the longer it goes, the harder it is to recover. It doesn't mean that you can't recover, but as you said, like, all of a sudden, whether it's your physical health and someone all of a sudden has a heart attack, but they've been, their diet's been crap for the last 20 years, or the same with your mental health. All of a sudden, someone has a breakdown. They go, "Shit, where'd that come from?" And it's not. It's just that accumulative effect that you've held it so tight. It's like that the balloon theory where, or the bucket theory. You keep dripping drips of water, and eventually your bucket's going to full and overflow, or your balloon's going to burst. Well, at that time when everyone around you goes, "Well, what do I do here?" Like, we didn't see this coming, but there has been probably subtle signs for a number of years or whatever that's led to, or a number of weeks or months that have led to that one moment in time.
Mm. And you said before, certainly having that nature of whether we're providing, whether we're trying not to be a burden, whether we're just trying to fix the problem in front of us, and we throw ourselves off that list because we need to get this problem fixed first
Yeah,
before we think about us, right? And we just had a call with a lot of our business owners last night that was fix you and the business will fix the business, right? Like, get to that point that we're having a discussion like, what are the things in your day that allow you to show up more present, more energetic, more focused rather than reactive, tired, and grumpy? That's going to make a significant difference in your leadership style, right? So getting to a point that we look at that, I can say that from going through that as well. This little helmet over here is from a pretty big motorbike crash I had a couple of years ago, and broke a lot of shit. And that was something that, both physically broke and mentally, like, I'm not unbreakable as well. So there was a
yeah,
lot of stuff I had to consolidate there. And going through that space of, I can, when you said it, I resonated with it right away, because I was like, well, I've got shit to do on Monday. This is inconvenient, right? Like,
yeah,
I nearly died, and there was all of this things that I was worried about that still needed to be done. So it's
yeah,
such an automatic process of, well, there's other things I need to sort and fix and provide.
yeah.
And really just breaking that habit down, as you said, I think part of that is just maybe it's ingrained, whether it's a nature nurture thing. It's that discussion of how do we break that habit to realize that we're still being productive, or that we're more productive through showing up in a way for us first. Or am I looking at that entirely wrong, where we shouldn't even be worried about the productive aspect? It's just, regardless of whether we're busy, successful, or otherwise, we're still enough right now. Which way do we go?
Yeah, and that's so there's two things about the discussion. Like, one of the things, like, I was surrounded, as I said, I'm a husband and a dad and a brother and a son and all that sort of stuff. So I had people around me, and I was in a loving, still in a loving relationship with, everything around me that I needed. But that I felt that burden that I couldn't actually talk to my wife about what we were going through, because we were raising 4 kids at that stage. We had one on the way, so we've got 5 kids. She was right in the middle of raising kids, as well as trying to support me on the farm, which she did fantastically. But then I couldn't unload my burden on her, because she was going through the same crap that I was going through. So that having that conversation can be tough. So, and I know that, from from my perspective. But the other aspect of it that I realise now, and I try and promote this with, whether it's I'm talking to farmers or business owners or whatever, is that one of the realizations I have now is that I was the number one asset in my business. It wasn't on my asset list, or, in my books or anything like that, but I was the number one asset. And if I wasn't operating at 100%, how could I expect my business to operate at 100%? Because, I wasn't making the right decisions, particularly when I was in that, the darkest part of my spiral. My decision making was way off, and even that decision around not wanting to speak to my wife, that's was, the wrong sort of decision to be making. But because I was so clouded in my mind, I needed to really focus on that, because, as you said, if you look after yourself, the rest should take care of itself, because you're then operating at 100% of your capacity, and you're making better decisions. You're working better, and everything's a little bit more clearer. And you can make decisions that, I always even think today in hindsight, which is a romantic, I suppose, romantic thing to do. But I always think, well, if I had been in a clearer headspace, would I have made a different decision and not walked off the farm? Was that a knee-jerk reaction just to the absolute pressure that we were under, the financial stress and strain, and emotional, physical exhaustion that we were feeling? Should we have hung on? They're the things that play through my head. But because of my, it was just a clear-cut thing, like, let's leave, like, walk off this farm, and we'll go and take up a management job, which we did in South Australia, thinking that would be better. But it actually wasn't, and that job didn't actually last long. And really, that was the start of this whole journey of, I tried to find out who I was. Like I always say that leaving that farm, I lost my identity because, and it doesn't matter if it's a farm or a business, because or whatever it is, my whole identity was tied up with that. And leaving that farm, I unclipped my identity and left it with that farm, because that's who I thought I was. And I felt like I'd failed. And it took a long time and a lot of, to and fro, doing different jobs. And I went from job to job. And as a dad of 5 kids, that's not a really ideal situation where you're trying to recover from losing everything, and then you're going from job to job. So now in hindsight, I look at it and I'm thinking, yeah, I probably needed to focus more on my mental health, my well-being, and all that sort of stuff, instead of focusing on that big picture, because nothing was ever improving. Like, get a good job, work there for a bit, then move on. And so it was, yeah, it's really important, I think, that, we realize that we are that, whether it's a business or your life, you are the number one asset, and you've got to be operating at 100% to be able to give 100%, and probably receive 100% as well.
Yeah, and as you were talking, it's one of those areas that I can resonate with, where everyone on that's listening to this has probably been through some version of that sort of survival moment, right? Whether it's the real shakeup of business, you've been fired, there's a major injury, there's something going on with family, there's something where we get put back into that primitive space and we just get sewed into like, cool, what do I do about it now, right? But if that's something that's going on for periods of months and years, at some point, yeah, as you said, stepping back and bringing this awareness to your own self-awareness of how you're potentially operating in some of those scenarios. And if you're underslept and under-recovered and reactive and grumpy and all of these things, you're probably going to have a pretty big outcome difference on the outside, right? So having a little look at just at what point do I start having a bit of a different discussion of how I'm running into this wall, and maybe I can walk around it, getting to a point that I can have that discussion. But certainly for me, my wife's been absolutely amazing with this, always being able to identify emotions that I didn't know were there. As you probably found, it was either anger or happy, and there wasn't
Yeah,
much else going on. So getting
yeah,
awareness of what sadness felt like, and what disappointment and frustration and all these other components of emotions that could kind of come through is a really scary thing for us to even to internalize, to consolidate, to think through before we can even communicate that externally. And I've certainly noticed this with certain family members on my side, is anger comes up when something is felt, right? So
yeah,
knowing how to talk about something and feeling these emotions is part of that communication. That for me, I shut down for a really long time, where anger was like, oh, anger, shut up, right? And try
yeah.
to like really break that up. So give me some tweaks, and people in that call that are looking through, those first communication things. And I'll give you an example. For me, it was always to my wife now was, hey, do you mind if we just sit on the couch? So that was my prompt to just like chat, right? Because if I was standing up and like talking to her face and face, I just felt like super weird about it, considering my own emotions, being able to communicate them, all of the things that get wrapped up in that, right? So my
Yeah.
prompt was, hey, do you mind if we just sit on the couch so we could have a discussion around something? Have you got any things like that just for someone who, like, we're getting purely tactical in our Warren? I understand this is like very personal, but it's an ability to look at it through starting that conversation is the thing we're trying to break, right? Like, let us in at the tickle or the whack, not the full blown truck. And what can we do for blokes on the call? They're like, yep, Warren's talking to me right now.
Yeah, look, and as I said, that was a tough decision, like a tough discussion. Like, to be at my lowest of low points. Like, and I'm sure we'll get onto this, but I talk a bit about resilience, and resilience is an overused word in my book. But on that darkest of darkest afternoons, I picked myself up off the floor and dusted myself off, showed true resilience, and just got on with it, basically. One of the biggest burdens that I carried was, and really hindered my recovery, was not talking to my wife about it. And it took me a number of years to actually summon the courage to, not feel like that was a failing point in my life. It was actually the rebirth of who I am. And talk to her about how I felt, all that. And that was like a liberating experience. So I think, like you keep reiterating, is that we need to, when we start feeling this stuff, we need to I think we need to have the tools in our toolbox to be able to recognize those emotions and behaviors and act on them straight away instead of letting them build up. And there's some of, one of the things, particularly, I say in my presentations, I talk about building these tools in your toolbox, and emotional understanding is number one, like, around awareness, have some emotional understanding. And I always say, look, I'm really focusing on you blokes in the room here because we're shit at this. And we need to understand what emotions and what behaviors. And like you said, it's either you're happy or you're angry, and there's nothing in between. And you got to know how to deal with that anger, but also you don't want to be this, person that's just way over the top. And I suppose looking inwards from the outside, there's some of the signs that we need to pick up on people that are struggling with their mental health. Is, if you see someone who's angry one minute, and then there's, the life of the party and as happy as that. Well, maybe that's just a subtle, I suppose, trigger or clue to say, well, maybe they're struggling a little bit, and maybe if they keep exhibiting those signs, I need to have a conversation with them around, how they're traveling. And I always say it takes a lot of courage to reach out and ask for help. It does. It's really hard, but it also takes a lot of courage to reach in. So if you're noticing, someone that's having those feelings, but I understand, like, if I take my perspective, it was either anger or happy. There was a lot of sadness, don't get me wrong. Going through the drought, I was really like, and I felt like I was a lot of shame and guilt and frustration and all that. And I know my wife probably tried to reach in and talk to me about how I was feeling, but the only emotion that I was showing at that stage was anger and frustration. So that would nip that conversation in the bud.
Mm.
And she's one of my greatest tools in my toolbox now, because she keeps me grounded, and she'll tell me straight out now that, you need to change the way you're reacting to that, or, that you need to put a smile on your face, or it's all, whatever it is. And she's not frightened to tell me that now, but back at that lowest of low moments, I think that conflict wasn't helping the whole situation, but it was a conversation that needed to be had, but kept getting nipped in the bud by my own emotions that we're getting. So having that understanding is the number one tool in your toolbox, I think, around your emotions.
Yeah, it's such a tough one. And, the amount of people I talk to that, I just got off a call with a bloke who's, really gone through some massive shifts in his business. There was a massive breakdown in a marriage, and he's just starting to really rebuild with a new partner. Business is going much better. He's, feeling better than ever he has because he's finally got his health back on his side. But a big part of that was also timing, and it was getting an awareness of giving yourself space to, it's not going to be fixed overnight. And for him, he'd been through certain health programs and gyms and things in the past. And he said, look, the reason they didn't work was my head wasn't in the game. And you guys really allowed us to address your head first before looking at the exercise and all the other stuff. Right. And I think there's too many men that are in that spot that are like, cool, my health isn't working, so I'm going to go slog myself in the gym and I'll fix all of these other issues that are coming through. Whereas where I think we're entering this discussion is a bit more around actually giving yourself some space. And just as much in the business world, we talk about just actually being okay with white space in your calendar is where the best work gets done. It's also from a health standpoint, that space in your day to actually consolidate what you're feeling or thinking. I don't know if you've got some tools, maybe we can dive into this in a second, but just the 3 to 5 deep breaths when you first wake up or before a meal. One, it's going to be massive for your digestion, but two, has been a really nice way for me to reinforce that loop of how do I feel, right? The day's going flat out, lots of things going on. How do I feel, right? And just bringing that loop and building the muscle ultimately, right? Of, well, where am I actually starting to fit me in the day? Because it's real easy to throw 10 things on there I need to do for other people. What am I doing for me, right? So it's that reinforcing of, if it feels uncomfortable and it feels weird right now, whether it's talking about emotions, putting us in our day, or talking to others, it kind of comes back to that rebuild of, it's because you haven't done any reps, right? Let's do a couple more and start to build up some steps there. So where I want to go, I guess, is maybe there's something in there, but from a tool belt standpoint, if you want to hand pick a couple out, or if you've got a sequence to walk through, if someone's really in that spot and they're like, again, Warren's talking to me, I've been really going through some hard stuff for 6 months, 2 years, it's been something that's really in a spot right now, and I'm trying to get my health back on my side, but I'm really noticing that mental and emotional health was a big part of that. What tools do I start looking at?
Yeah, I'll just go back to your original point there, because that really resonated with me, because, you know, I don't know what what you're seeing out there and how people are feeling, but you know, there's a lot of pressure out in the world at the moment. And for myself, as a small business owner, the same thing. You know, I've got to keep, you know, developing my programs, getting speaking gigs and all that. And there's been a bit of a quiet patch. And I talked to my business coach about this the other week, and she actually said to me, "You're exactly where you need to be at the moment, because I've got all this other shit that I need to get sorted. So use that time, that white space in your calendar, to get that sorted. So when things get busy again, it's not so frantic, and set these systems." And I think that was a really good piece of advice, because I was getting stressed because I had white space in my calendar, but it's actually what I needed.
Mm.
And you've got to look at that. It's there for a reason. Even though you want to be busy, but being busy doesn't necessarily mean being productive. And you can get busy, 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 and as I said, forget about that number one asset, which is you. Some of those tools, as I said, um, you know, you got to understand your emotions and understand how that's impacting your behaviors. But one of the things that I do, I've got this very basic wheel that I call my unbreakable wheel of well-being, which it gets you to focus on all your well-being domains, whatever they are, whatever affects your well-being. And for everyone, that's a bit different. But like emotional, physical, mental, financial, relationships, all those sorts of things create spokes in your wheel, and you rate yourself 1 to 5 on each one of those well-being domains. 1 being terrible, 5 being excellent. You go through that exercise, and then you look at your wheel and have a look how balanced it is. And what that does for me, I do this on a fortnightly basis. It gives me a visualization of where I'm at, and that changes from fortnight to fortnight. What areas do I need to focus on, or am I really bogged down and thinking I need to fill my calendar when I need to be focusing on maybe a bit more on my social side, or my emotional well-being, or my financial well-being? Here I am, focusing on just filling the calendar, and you get that, blinkers on, and that's what you're trying to do. And that plays its part, but also then you've got to be taking into account all these other things. And that become really powerful to me, that exercise. I've been talking about wellbeing domains, and look, it's not my work. You can Google anything about wellbeing domains anywhere. But I spoke in the Remand Centre in Melbourne, and to a group of prisoners, and this prisoner came up to me afterwards, and he said to me, that unbreakable wheel of wellbeing that you're talking about, he goes, it's really resonated with me. And I said, oh, how? And he goes, well, in my head, I've sat there and done my wheel, and he goes, intellectually, I'm a 5, and I'm fairly smart. And I wasn't going to argue with him, because I was in a fairly confronting environment, being in a prison with 2 little warders that looked like they couldn't punch their way out of a paper bag. But he said, I'm a 5, and physically, this guy, but he'd been incarcerated for a long time, and basically looked like all he'd done is stood in front of a mirror for that whole time, pumping iron. He had the biggest arms I'd ever seen on a bloke. Anyway, he goes, and physically I'm a 5. And once again, I said I wasn't arguing with him, but he said emotionally and socially, and those other domains, he said, I'm probably not even a 1. And he goes, when I visualized my wheel in my head, it was actually a triangle, and I was stuck. So he was smart enough to realize that maybe he needed to put the weights down, and then focus on some of these other well-being domains, because he was getting out in 4.5 months' time, and he visualized his wheel at the front door, rolling out the door and not coming back in. That made it really important. So it was an exercise. Once he did that to me, reiterated what his thoughts were. I started doing it myself, even though I've been talking about it. It was, one of those tools that you talk about, but you probably don't do yourself. It's another thing as people that work in this space, we've got to remember we've got to practice what we preach sometimes. So I started doing it, and it gives you a visualization. Oh yeah, financially this fortnight I'm doing really well, but I need to work on, my relationships or my environment, like you said. And when I say environment, I might need to get out and go for a walk more than being sit in front of a computer or whatever, just to give myself some time and space to just be able to, think clearly and understand where you're at and what actions you need to take to be able to balance that wheel out and make sure that you're rolling forward the best as you can. I'm a realist though, and everyone's spokes aren't going to be all equal. Your wheel's going to wobble at times to time, but as long as it's rolling and doesn't get stuck or fall or completely fall off, that's the important part. So that's one a real big tool that I talk about. And the other thing is knowing who the people are that are in your support network. As I said, when I was at my darkest time, didn't really know who to reach out to, who to talk to. So understanding who those, whether it's one, whether it's five, or whether it's 20 people that are in your support network that are there for you, and identifying who they are. So it's a tough exercise to do. And I talk to this with my audiences is, when I sat down and did it, I'm pretty lucky. I've got 5 adult kids, I've got a wife, I've got a doctor, a psychologist, and a mentor. The mentor and I, we've only ever really sat down once face to face, but we talk a fair bit. So, he's part of my support network. But the interesting part is 2 of my best mates aren't in my support network. Even though I love them and they're my best mates and all that sort of stuff, they probably haven't got the tools in their toolbox to support me if the, proverbial hits the fan. So it's a really interesting thing to sit down and work out, well, who are these people? And part of that exercise is acknowledging them. So having a conversation with them now as a proactive conversation instead of bringing them up and saying, shit, I've had a breakdown, I need your help. Have a proactive conversation with them to say, look, I've identified you're part of my support network, and whether that can be made up of professional people as well, whether it's a coach or a psychologist or a doctor or whoever it is, but having that conversation with those people around you in your support network to say, look, I've identified you're part of my support network. I can return the favour and be part of yours, but just know that if shit hits the fan, I might be going to ring you but already have that conversation had instead of having that in the middle of crisis, having that conversation, say, look, you're in my support network and everything's falling apart. Have that conversation. So that's already started that conversation with these people before the crisis happens.
Yeah, I love that, Warren. It's awesome. I think the first part is, that self-review in whatever
Yeah.
version you do. We do that with our clients every single month. There's some version of really consolidating and breaking it down. We have a monthly version and then a full quarterly that really allows us to get an alignment of where that's going. But getting, as you said, whether you're using your business in a financial sense or the gym in a weight sense or cardio, whatever the thing is, as a avenue where you're doubling down on something that you're trying to take from a 9 to a 9.5, but your emotional health is at a 2, then that's something we can build up to a 4, and you're going to notice a lot more balance overall. And I think it's a really nice awareness of how we continue to double down on our strengths when it might be something else that's missing. And just that personal self-reflection process. If you're listening to this podcast, please make sure that if you aren't doing that regularly, block some sort of time out over the next month and just make that a date to yourself. Make sure that's an anchor towards what that looks like. And I think that discussion of, let the guys know before shit hits the fan that you've got that support network. The first time they'll be hearing about it shouldn't be when you're already in the pit. They should already know that they're in that network and they're there to help you out. And hopefully that's mutual. But yeah, I really like that it's not just people that you're friends with, right? You're really getting an awareness of skill set and people that are truly going to help in those environments. I know that I've got friends that I can, go for a run with or a mountain bike, but they're not going to be necessarily the first people I talk to if there's something I really need to digest and discuss. And being able to identify again that ahead of time just becomes part of that process of making sure you're giving yourself that white space in your week, your month, your year to actually think about you and what that support network looks like as well.
Yeah, and I think that, and that's having that greater awareness of self, like, and knowing, who those people are, and what are the, getting back to the, your emotional awareness, knowing the emotions and the behaviors that are attached to those emotions, particularly around anger and frustration and stuff like that. Understand, and making sure that, you've got tools in your toolbox that not only, I suppose, not control them, because you don't want to control them, but some strategies that help you deal better with those, because as I think you said earlier on, is we need to feel these emotions. You can't just lock them out.
Hmm.
So the strategies and tools are, you've still got to feel that. If you're angry, you still got to feel it, but you've got to make sure that you're aware of how that anger is being used or displayed, I suppose, um, and having those tools to help you deal through that. And yeah, I think it helps you identify the behaviors that are attached to them better.
Yeah, I'm just thinking through this now, but I think the awareness of just asking yourself that question, is this actually anger, is a really nice question to ask, because I think certainly farmers are fairly good at giving themselves some form of ownership around, like, well, this is my fault, so I'll fix it. Or, no one else is going to fix it but me. And there's an immense amount of ownership of like, I'll do the thing.
Yeah,
But at the same time, we do it with a sense of violence, in a way of making sure that it's done now and it must be done by me,
yeah,
rather than consolidating or giving ourselves time to actually think through, are we okay? Or at least just that discussion of stopping every now and then to see what's coming through. And look, I can tell you, we've had a ton of farmers through our programs. I grew up on a farm, very much in between the sheep and beef farms, the dairy farms. That was literally my childhood. So I was surrounded by it a lot of the time, but it was really as you said, it's that sort of comes across as stoic nature, but really it can be a real internal judgment of not feeling emotions other than frustration or anger, right? Because every second word is fuck. So
yeah,
by being able to really break that down and have a discussion around what's actually going on, it just allows you to really reshape what you see as being your male role models in a way, right? Like, who do you look up to and who are those people? Because it's probably not the guy that's grumpy and doesn't talk and only swears and kicks his dog and whatever else comes through, right? It's probably more of a slightly more evolved human that's thinking through a couple more things. And I know plenty of farmers in that space, and they're just happier, they're more aware, they're able to have great conversations, they're able to enjoy their work again, and
yeah,
really be in a spot where, if you're in that pit, a farm's a shit place to be. But if you really allow yourself to appreciate what you're doing and how what kind of lifestyle you've created for yourself, it's a fantastic lifestyle, right? But the thing that gets in
exactly.
the way of that is that 2 inches between your ears of how are we talking to ourselves, how are we giving ourselves that self relationship.
Yeah, and I think, that comes down to that word, and it gets used a fair bit, and that's feeling isolated. And
Mm,
geographically, farmers are isolated, and work-wise, they're isolated because you're generally, it's either one-on-one or a small team, and generally you're doing multiple jobs to get the day done, so you're not actually interacting. So there's a lot of think time, like sitting in a tractor milking cows. I used to, because when I'm milking cows, I could switch off, and
mm,
all of a sudden, that's a shit space to be, because your head starts going, and you've got
yeah,
to be really, really aware of yourself, your internal dialogue. Like, it's where podcasts
yeah,
come in really well. Podcasts and music, and that, especially in the tractor, is that you can focus on something else other than what's going on in your head. And I think, like, they're great strategies to have as well, because you can be, like, I did a post the other day. My father-in-law passed away a couple of weeks ago, and we're on his farm, and we're just trying to sort out a few fences. And I went and did some fencing, and I said fencing is very therapeutic to me. And I don't know what it is about fencing, because some people think, everyone commented on my post, well, if you like fencing, come and do mine, basically. But I don't know if it's the physical nature, the mental concentration, or the sense of achievement, or whatever it is for me, but it's very therapeutic. And you know, doing those jobs can be the other way too, because you can be in your head, and you can be very lonely, no one to talk to, and all that. So you've got to be very aware of what that internal dialogue is. And it's one of the things that, when I talk about isolation, like there's isolation, there's isolation. You can be out in the middle of Timbuktu and be farming and by yourself, and you can be quite happy. And a lot of people are, but it's when you're isolated within your own thoughts, or you haven't got that support network around you. That's when it becomes dangerous, I suppose, is a good word. And going back to that, same as that resilience piece, you can be resilient. There's nothing wrong with being resilient and bouncing back and riding the bumps and all that, but it's got to be coupled with well-being. Because my story, perfect example, is bouncing back from all these things and not actually taking into consideration your own well-being while you're being resilient, can be detrimental to your overall mental health.
100%. Yep. It's absolutely it. It can be a blessing or a curse to have all this space and all this freedom to really create the lifestyle you want, but it's really just managing that headspace. And if you're in that pit, obviously we're directing this towards farmers, but the amount of roles where we're becoming more and more isolated from a physical location. I literally work from home, right? And I could choose to not see anyone for a week if I wanted to, right?
Yeah.
But being able to really protect that space. And if you are seeing the things go south, don't let it continue going that way. Have that conversation, and as a really effective tool, certainly for myself, going through that self-assessment process of what areas am I leaving behind, who are those people in my support network ahead of time, become two really nice ways to look at it, if not simply that ability to consolidate what emotion you're actually feeling and what continues to recur. And then breaking that down a little bit, because sometimes I think we just let that story of whatever has happened go on a bit too long. Being able to break that down and just give ourselves the space to consolidate makes a huge difference. So I'm really enjoying this, Warren. I've got one or two last questions for you, just to really, I think we've kept this a bit more tactical, but I think it's very much a discussion that's being needed. And for certainly the farmers, alongside many other clients in our program, I've really found them to be the people that thrive when they start to create some routines in their day. It might be as simple as a morning walk. It might be actually sitting down for lunch. Farmers, by the way, just from a blood work standpoint, are chronically dehydrated. They need to drink more water. But getting to a point of just self-care, they're the guys that really start to pick up a smile, drop some weight, get their energy back, and feel really good quickly when they start to protect one or two routines for themselves. And I'd love to know what yours are for you, or that you recommend really regularly, whether physical, mental, getting awareness of in your day or your week. What are one or two things that are just non-negotiables for you, that if you miss them, you feel a bit more cranky?
You just hit on the word, because I talk about non-negotiables in my talk as well, and you go, well, that's near impossible to tell a farmer to have a non-negotiable in your life that you just do for yourself. And
Yeah.
what does that look like? And and I talk about having mindfulness strategies. Like one of mine that I do just to help me get outside my head is when I do go for a walk, I love taking sunrise or sunset photos. And that's probably a remnant of being a dairy farmer and seeing so many, but it's something that just helps you get outside your head. So having simple strategies in your day, and we talk about meditation, and if I bring up in it, it's a little bit different these days, but it's still the same. If I talk about particularly to a prominently farmer audience, and I say, maybe we need to put some meditation into your day, and they'll look at you because they're thinking, well, I've got to sit down in a room under a triangle with my legs crossed and my palms facing to, that whole image of what meditation is. I said, no, that could be sitting down in the back paddock in the ute, watching the clouds go by or watching the sunset. That can be a form of meditation. Or, instead of riding the bike out to check a stock trough or go and get the cows, go for a walk out to the paddock and experience exactly what you said before, that lifestyle that you've created for yourself. No better workplace than being outside. So, having just simple strategies in your day, and there's not just one, and everyone's going to have different ones. Like I've got different strategies for lots of things that I do, in particular around speaking. As I said, I still deal with anxiety on a daily basis. I've got, strategies like from, just listening to music to really dissecting a song and just trying to pick out the hi-hats and the
Mm.
drums or something in a song, because it takes so much mental energy to actually do that, to block out the vocals and the guitars and just listen to the hi-hats. And by the time I get to a speaking gig, my anxiety's gone because
Mm.
I've used that mental focus. So so that's when, fencing come into, applying that mental and physical energy into something that, helps you just switch off a little bit and get outside your head. So I think simple strategies, and they're different for everyone, whether it's fishing, golfing, going for a walk, listen to a song, reading a book, whatever it is. You just need some simple strategies in the day just to release that pressure valve and get outside your head and just be, just be basically.
Yep.
And so I think they're really important strategies to have or to really think about. And obviously, business owners and particularly farmers, that's really hard because you get bogged down in your day to day. But I think having that non-negotiable in your day is really important, and having some real mindfulness strategies in your routine is important. And touching on that routine, I think it's really important. And God, I'm shit at it. I'll put my hand up now and be really honest. But I think what it requires an exercise of sitting down and trying to articulate what your ideal day looks like. And one of the things I think about, towards the end of my career, like I was a dairy farmer for 35 years. So towards the end of my career, I started to be a bit of a drag. But now I think about it, there was no better purpose than getting up early in the morning and experiencing early morning and that milking cows. Like it's a great experience. So you need to sit down and work out, whether you're a business owner or whatever, what's your ideal day and how's that going to be structured? And does that mean going for a walk in the morning or eating breakfast and not just scooting out the door and, waving goodbye kind of thing? You sit down, is that you got to make sure that there's things that work for you, and everyone's going to be different, but things that work in your day. But I think ideally it's sitting down and working out what's that ideal day look for me. And, does it mean taking the dog for a walk in the morning or in the night time? Or does it mean, at lunchtime you go for a walk or you do something that's part of that mindfulness, non-negotiable process in your day? So, everyone's going to be different. But for me, it's taking those photos, going for walks, listening to music, also podcasts, because I like that knowledge. And it's not something that I was always into, but now listening to podcasts, getting other people's perspectives, and know that pretty much you're not by yourself. There's a lot of people that have got struggles.
Yeah, I really like that. And I think you've identified one key thing there as well, which was the stigma around something like a meditation, right? Really nice way to look at it through. I use a very simple analogy here was, look, meditation doesn't need to be 2 hours on a mountaintop. It could simply be 5 deep breaths on the end of your bed, right? And it sort of highlights how much you and I see this come through is something that makes you feel good. The only thing holding you back from doing that is the stigma attached to what it's called, right? So we notice this around writing in your diary versus writing in your journal versus writing in your playbook. It's all the same thing, but it's like whatever you call it and whatever makes you feel good, then do that thing, right? So if it's writing your thoughts down and really being able to consolidate that through writing, whether it's that breathing practice to be able to just pause in that day, or whether it's that walk or whatever else. I think a lot of people are really in a space where they stop themselves doing the thing that feels good for them just because of what it's called or the stigma attached. If you do it and it feels good, do it more often, right? And I think it becomes a really nice way just to simplify that whole routine aspect. And you've highlighted some really cool ones there as well that I hadn't even thought of, like
here's a perfect example of journaling. When you talk about journaling or writing in a diary or whatever, during COVID, because of our restrictions and all that, couldn't do my speaking, couldn't travel. So I was doing a lot of online stuff, but I actually went back farming and was driving tractors on a tomato farm. So, doing 800-meter runs up and down a paddock, doing row cropping at 7 k's an hour. There's a lot of time to think. I used to write on the window of this tractor.
Yeah.
I used to, thoughts that come into my head or ideas that I'd have, and I'd scribble them up in a texter on the window, and that was my journaling for the day. Like, I wasn't in a book or anything, but it was there, and I'd take a photo of what I'd written for the day, then wipe it off before anyone else seen it. But I had I suppose, a form of journaling because I'd taken a photo of what I'd written during the day. But spending 12 hours a day on a tractor, 7 k's an hour up and down the paddock, it can be mind numbing. So then I started thinking, or I'd listen to a podcast of, geez, how can I put what that person just articulated exactly what I want to say how can I put that in my words? So I'd write down the quote that they'd say, and then I'd try and work out a way, how can I articulate what they just said perfectly in my own words? Like it was, yeah. So however you do that, whether it's writing notes on the dust on your dashboard for you, it doesn't, doesn't matter. It's just trying to get those thoughts outside of your head is a good way to keep things clear and give you, focus and also thoughts on how you can make a better version of yourself the next day.
Yeah, man, totally. Find the version that works for you best, and as you said, you've turned something that could have otherwise been mind numbing into something that's actually a really great opportunity to consolidate. So if that's commuting, if it's tractor driving, if it's that morning walk and choosing to take that rather than the four wheeler, right? Just get an awareness of
Yeah.
where that comes in. Dude, we've gone through a lot of really great stuff here. I think we could probably go for another hour, but getting awareness of at least having that discussion around mental health, I think we really took it from a couple different angles of one, what does that look like for you internally? What can you control if you're the guy listening? If it's someone that you care about, someone that you're seeing go through that path, what are some of those strategies that we can apply? And then lastly, just sort of some of those more tactical things of like, what do those actual steps look like when I want to either improve my mental health or keep on top of it, and really how that applies into very much the physical, professional world, all of these other things that come in. So, dude, you've been an absolute legend. Thanks for jumping on, and appreciate everything you've brought in today.
No, absolute pleasure, Ollie. Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome.